Now, was Syre originally rehearsing in the same hall as Helix? Is this what formed your Helix connection?
Yeah, that, and we had the same management as Helix. So our manager belonged to the same management group as the Helix guys. And I think Kick-Axe was in there at some point, too.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now, how did the band hook up with producer-musician Joel Wade to sing background vocals on the first album?
That one, we were looking for some kind of airy, really high vocals. I really don't have a very good falsetto, and none of the other guys could sing that high, so we ended up bringing someone in. I'm not sure how our manager knew Joel, but there's actually a good picture of us doing some backups that's on the... I put together like kind of a slideshow for the song Believe. It's on YouTube, Syre, Believe. And if you watch that, there's one picture where Joel's in the picture doing the backgrounds, and I'm there. And we're kind of around a studio mic. Also in the picture, I believe, is Sean Saunders, the lead singer for Buffalo Brothers, another London band, but a great band. They were on Attic Records, and trying to remember who else was in that picture, maybe Chip or Chris. But a good picture of Joel in there doing his thing.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now, with both Syre CDs being very sought after and out of print, have any labels either asked the band to reissue them or to re-record them?
We haven't been asked yet. I'd be interested in doing another release. There's quite a bit of interest. And as an artist, you hate to see folks who are looking for those CDs. I don't want to say get rooked, but there's folks that are selling them online for quite a lot of money. So I'd rather work on some kind of deal where we could have a re-release and maybe even talk about that live release. So
yeah, maybe release Pissed to the Gills again, re-record it, and have the bonus track Fight Fire with Fire on it.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I'd say I like that CD a lot, and I mean it was a limited pressing when we did it, so it's not that easy to find. So
no, it's my favorite CD by Syre.
Excellent. Yeah, I liked, I love the first CD. There were some things I would do differently on the first CD, but I really like the Pissed to the Gills CD. Yes. And, if any of your listeners want to hear a couple of songs, like I say, Believe, is on...
YouTube, I think, right?
YouTube, so they can get kind of a feel for where we were going with that CD, so...
Definitely heavier and edgier. And from what I understand, it was kind of just demos for the most part, some of them?
Yeah, I mean, some of it we started off with, some demos that we had been working on probably near the end of the first CD. They weren't done in time for the first CD, but kind of working through those. And as I say, we worked a lot with Bob, and then... ended up working a lot with Jim Huff as well, from like you say, Wall of Silence and the works, to kind of finish those off. So it was it became edgier, which was cool. So I've always liked edgier. So
hey, maybe even do an all new Syre CD sometime down the road. Now that would be cool.
You never know. Yeah, it'd be a lot of fun. Seems like everyone's so busy right now, but these things have a way of happening when schedule's clear, so we'll see what happens.
Exactly. Now, did your band Hateful Snakes ever record any material?
Yeah, I was in Hateful Snake at the kind of the latter part. I was proud to be in Hateful Snake. It was one of the first true metal bands in the country. I wasn't in the original
lineup, right?
Lineup of the Snake, but I came in afterwards, and that was through a friend named Tony Maroney. It's kind of an ironic name, Tony Maroney.
No kidding.
He's a filmmaker, photographer out of Toronto, but he managed Hateful Snake, and they did a kind of an EP back in the day, probably around 1980, 81. But it's with their original singer Brian Simpson, and they did a video which was filmed on Yonge Street, and I believe it's on YouTube. So if you're curious to hear some very early Canadian metal, these guys were metal. And the other ironic thing was in the band I was playing with at the time, which was I think we were called Sentinel or the Poison. Our bass player's girlfriend is the blonde in the Hateful Snake video. So there was a tie to Hateful Snake before I actually even met the guys.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but that was one of those things.
Now, did they record any original material, your band, the Sentinels?
We did some original stuff, and that was the time I had written Benjamin Suicide, which is on Recoup with Sentinel. I wrote it, but that was at the time, and we probably did a few demos of that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now on to another older band. Did your band Destroyer, that later changed their name to Sex, did they record any original material?
Yes, we did. Actually, that's an interesting story, too. There are a lot of interesting stories in this business, but we were pretty young at that time. And our bass player at the time, Roger Powell, had an older sister, and her name escapes me, but she was going out with a fellow by the name of Don Garbett. Don Garbett was an amazing musician. Actually, is probably the first person that I ever saw work with Moog synthesizers back in the day when they had like the kind of channels you would plug in and to really get the different sounds. You know, it wasn't like pressing a button today. You really had to kind of wire stuff together and know what you were doing. And I believe he ended up as a professor at one of the universities in Toronto. He's on my Facebook, actually. Don, he's a great guy, really good bass player, and he took us into York University, which he was a student at the time, and we recorded 3 or 4 songs there. But what impressed me about that was I kind of was wandering in the bowels of the building where the studio was, and walked into the computer room, and this was at a time where the computer room at York University was probably like 50 by 50, and it was full of all those reel-to-reel machines, and that was like their computer back in the day. My phone probably has more computing power now than that whole room did, but it was really interesting. That was Roger Powell and Troy Smith and I. It was a trio with Destroyer/Sex. I'm really surprised no one's ever taken that name, by the way, and just run with the straight-out Sex.
No kidding.
Sex Pistols and some other variants on Sex, but no one's just used Sex. So
Motley Crue recorded a song called Sex, but that's the closest thing I could think of.
Yeah, I know, eh? I think Madonna had a book called that, too.
Yes, she did. That's right. I'd love to hear some of those early demos. Maybe someday, Doug Weir box set or something.
Yeah, that's right. I actually, I'm surprised you knew about those bands, but those were heady days. I'll have to listen through some of the tapes that came out of those sessions and send you a copy.
That would be awesome, Doug. Well, thank you very much for the interview. I know we've been talking about doing it for a long time and just scheduling and life and that. It's worked out today.
Absolutely. No, I've had a great time chatting with you in person. It's a lot easier on my thumbs than texting.